second day of spring, and we see that second full day, we would say. Catherine was telling me this morning that she had heard someone say that 22nd was not the first day of spring, and I told her, I said, well, I heard yesterday that the 20th was the first day of spring, but next last thing I know, it's always been the 21st, the whole first day, so that's what I'm going to go with. And I don't like change a lot, so the great thing about it that we see there with it. But we're going to be in our study this morning dealing here with, let me see, jump into here, Ahithophel and Hushai, counsel of Absalom. And as we see this, they're going to, 17 is going to show us basically where the beginning, the starting of God showing David that he does still want him as king, and changes are going to be made, and things are going to be moving back to the direction where they need to be away from his son Absalom, as we'll find. But let's go ahead and jump into our questions. Jump into our question where we're at. Our first one starts back to Jesus, and what was Jesus doing when he went up to heaven? What was he doing? He said he was raising his hands and says, and blessing them is what it states there. Exactly right. How did Jesus go up to heaven? He was lifted up, exactly right, lifted up. Talks about clouds in other versions. Luke doesn't mention it, but it does in others, so we see the importance with that as we find that there, exactly right. The next one out of Acts 4:12, in whose name did Peter say that salvation is found? It says Lord and Savior Jesus, exactly right, we see that. Next one, Bathsheba gave birth to a second son, whom David named who? He named Solomon, exactly right. You know, some people get confused thinking Solomon was the first go. Well, I don't think no, Solomon was the second baby, of course. Next one, after Amon had sinned with Tamar, did he love her? No, not at all. He forced her out of his room, out of his area there. When Absalom returned to Jerusalem after his exile, would David see him? No, he wouldn't see him for those 2 years. He didn't want to see him at all. He said, he can return here, but he will not see my face. Next one, when Absalom appeared before David, so this is after a little while, after living in Jerusalem for 2 years, what did David do to Absalom? He kissed him. He kissed him on the cheek, which is a very normal way for the Far East, you know, to basically say hello to someone, as we would see there. Basically with that, David was saying that he understands what he did, bringing it back in. However, David made it very clear it would be really hard to reconcile everything because certain things that took place, we know. So how did Absalom steal away the hearts, which will happen later now, how did Absalom steal away the hearts of the people of Israel from David? Through the gate, exactly right, judging, and the people would come, you know, to want to talk to the basically representative of the king, and Absalom was catching him before that, and basically telling the kingdom, you know, like, give me your questions, and he basically like, oh, that's a really great, yeah, that's really great, and I think we can work in that. And like, sorry, the king won't do anything for you. I mean, just making them look terrible, and that's exactly what we find, how he started stealing the hearts of the people. Why did David flee Jerusalem with his household? He was concerned that Absalom was going to do exactly what he said he'd do, kill him. You know, that he would kill him and all his family, everybody in the house. And we know it was that reason. There's also a second reason. The reason is because David knows that if he stayed and fought, there would be a civil war amongst the people, and he didn't want that. He wanted unity. And very most important, David tells us as we go along through that, is that he said, if this is God's will, so be it. You know, it may have been God's will not wanting to be king anymore. And he was going to go with whatever needed to be done, leave it in God's hands. Next one, how was the advice of Ahithophel regarded by David and Absalom? How did they look at it? 2 Samuel 16:23. They said, if we see there in the context, yeah, the council was, wasn't great as we see that, but they believed he was involved receiving some from God. And God was, exactly, it says there's the oracle of God. So in other words, that the Spirit of God will speak, we see, with him or bring messages to him and allow that to happen. But we know that wasn't the case. That's not what was happening at all because it was a bad man that we see. Which next, what is a psalm? It's a song. Very simple. Not a trick question or anything. It's a song that we see. And, you know, we go back to the times of the Old Testament. They didn't sing in four-part harmony like we do. You know, they chanted these songs is what we see. So that would be the psalm and the remembrance that was there with them. All right, so let's get into Ahithophel and Hushai as they canceled Absalom, 2 Samuel 17. This is really, that's the title that they give us in our book. I title this in a thought of, you know, when counsel collides with the will of God. And that's exactly what we see here. You know, this counsel of human, you know, worldly counsel. we see God's way will always be done. So as we look at this, really it's a powerful and sobering chapter that we see, the passage of Scripture here. Here we witness a moment of intense political intrigue, really. There's some spiritual warfare going on here, and divine sovereignty. You know, God's all involved in what's taking place here, and we need to be aware of that. So the scene is set with Absalom's rebellion against, not just against David, but also more importantly against who? Against God, we see without a doubt. And so two counselors stand before the rebellious son. Ahithophel, known for his sharp, trusted wisdom. He was very quick, very precise in what he would do, and they trusted him in a lot of ways. And then there was Hushai. Now he was a loyal friend of David, and actually sent there by David as a what? What would you call him? As a spy. Exactly right. He was spying on what was taking place, and he would send that information, remember, through the priest or the high priest. The high priest passed down to the priest, and they would take it, boom, and move on and get it to David. And we look at this where we think sometimes David and them are a long ways away. They're not that far away. And so we see that they're just out of sight where they don't know where they are. They're going to see those some movement farther as we see a little bit today. This chapter is not merely about strategy that we see between these two, but it's about, as we said, the clash of human wisdom with divine purpose. And that's really where we're going to get at here with this. It teaches us about the limits. There's limits to worldly gain. We need to understand that, especially as a Christian, we understand what God talks about, what the money and what it can do. We can't worship both, of course, God and mammon. We see that, and there's nothing wrong with having money. Don't think I'm saying that at all. It's just if we put that money before God, we're doing something wrong. And that's what we see here. So it's also the certainty of answered prayers, what we're going to see here. There's so much certainty in the answered prayers. We're going to see David's prayers will be answered, what he prayed earlier about this moment. And the impossibility, I'll say this, the possibility of outwitting God. You just can't outwit God. There's no way whatsoever, even as much people think they can, it just can't be done. Which brings us to our first part here. Worldly gain versus spiritual gain. Ahithophel represents worldly wisdom, and he represents it, I guess, at his finest. As we see a man that's all about himself, really when we find out, we see this, all about, what he can get out of it and where it can go from there, and, making sure that he still has a good counsel of him. We're going to learn how bad it is for him when he loses this counsel, when his advice is no longer taken, and we see what takes place with that. So his counsel was precisely said, logical, strategically brilliant. So let's go and jump into this. 2 Samuel 17, verses 1 through 4. Someone go and read it for us, please.
Moreover, Ahithophel said to Absalom, "Now let me choose 12,000 men, and I will rise and pursue David tonight. I will come upon him while he is weary and weak, and make him afraid, and all the people who are with him will flee. And I will strike only the king. Then I will bring back all the people to you. When all return, except the man whom you seek, all the people will be at peace." And the saying pleased Absalom and all the elders of Israel.
Thank you. So, from a human standpoint, this was really a very good plan, a flawless plan, in a sense, because you only kill the one. That's the problem that they're looking at. And you get the other people basically to turn, even though, I'm telling you right now, the way these other people love David, the ones that are with him, there ain't no way they're not going to die in such what meaning. They're definitely going to put their lives on the line for David if they had to. And that's what we find here. So, he wants to end this conflict. It's a way of thinking of doing this, what he's trying to show Absalom to take care of it. But what Ahithophel basically lacked was not intelligence, but once again, it was his alignment with God. He just did not have the right alignment. He really didn't have God in place at all in this theory. So this is where you and I today, we must pursue, I guess you'd say, or pursue the ways of God. And then we must, pause and examine our lives, from time to time. We have to be doing that. The Word often, rewards what works, not what is right. I want you to catch that. The Word often rewards what works and not what is right. Just because it's right in the eyes of humans, in the eyes of, society, or the eyes of our country or the world, doesn't make it right with God. And it's so important to see that. So, the world praises success even if it comes at the cost of righteousness. And that's not what we want as Christians today. So with all that being said, you think about words like this, Jesus. Jesus mentioned this when you think about Mark 8. Someone go and read this for us, Mark 8:36.
For what will it profit a man if he gains the whole world and loses his own soul?
Thank you. I kind of like this picture, how it's a human being, but you see a shadow. Notice the shadow. When you notice that or not, it's a dollar sign. And that's exactly what this guy's all about. And this is what we see this is getting about here. You know, that's everything worldly and put God to the side. You know, Ahithophel had influence, reputation, brilliance, but he was on, we said once again, the wrong side of God's plan. A worldly game without spiritual alignment leads to ultimate loss. And that's what we see throughout the story this morning. Paul himself, he understood this. You know, he was, wow, he truly understood it as Saul Tarsus, you know, and then, of course, moving on from there to become Paul. The tension between earthly life and eternal purpose, and he mentions it here to Philippi. He says these words, Philippians chapter 1, verse 21 to 24. If someone read this for us, please.
For me to live is Christ, and to die is gain. And if I live on in the flesh, this will mean fruit from my labor. Yet what shall I choose, I cannot tell. For I am hard pressed between the two, having a desire to depart and be with Christ, which is far better. Nevertheless, to remain in the flesh is more needful for you.
Thank you. So Paul values spiritual fruit without a doubt over personal advancement. Think about this for a moment, what we see here. You know, Paul wasn't saying, I want to stay here so I can enjoy the things of this world, you know, so I can enjoy what's going on. That's not what it was. He said he was ready to go to be with Jesus right away. He was ready to do it. But he said, the only reason I still am here and I need to be here is because I continue to bring you the Word of God, continue to bring His will. And that's what we see with that. So, you know, Ahithophel, however, he aligned himself with rebellion. He aligned himself for sake of influence. And once again, Jesus reminds us again of another verse here in Matthew chapter 23, verse 12. He says these words. Someone read this.
And whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted.
Thank you. So Ahithophel, there I'll get it right, wisdom, exalted himself, but his end would be humiliation. He's going to be humiliated, and that's why he's going to go do what he does here at the end. But not just humiliation, it ends up, that's what brings with that end, it's destruction. It's full destruction. We see this. And Hushai, on the other hand, humbly served David. We're going to see that here now. And ultimately, God's purpose we find as we get into this, we go through it. So we get to this next point, and that is God answers prayers even in the midst of chaos. I want us to get this. You know, and we may not sometimes understand how those prayers are answered or what the, you know, or even if they were, you know, but they will be, and in God's time, though. So remember this. David, we go back at 2 Samuel 15, prayed to God, basically, about as these moments are unfolding, and he prayed a very simple prayer, but very powerful. And he sees it now being fulfilled, that God is taking care of that. Let's go ahead and read that where it takes us back to 2 Samuel 15. If someone go and read verse 31, where we see this prayer of David.
And one told David, saying, Ahithophel is among the conspirators with Absalom. And David said, O Lord, I pray thee, turn the counsel of Ahithophel into foolishness.
Thank you. Notice he didn't go into this long, I guess you say very detailed prayer. He knew, God knew the details, and at this moment he said, please just let Ahithophel's, basically information and advice that he gives Absalom be worthless, basically. Let it be that it's not going to do anything for them at all. And that's where we see this basically echoed in chapter 17. So I'm going to go ahead and read this. We have 5 through 13, and then somebody stop a little bit through it, and then I'll have other people read after that. First of all, it says, Then Absalom said, Now call Hushai, the Archite, also, and let us hear what he has to say. So Absalom knew he has two very well, I guess you'd say men are very good at counseling people, counseling the king. And so he wants them both. Of course, he does not know he's there as a spy, but he does know that he was very close to David, and he explained that on Wednesday night. We saw that. But here we move on. It says, And when Hushai came to Absalom, Absalom spoke to him, saying, Ahithophel has spoken in this manner. Shall we do as he says? If not, speak up. So Hushai said to Absalom, The advice that Ahithophel has given is not good at this time. So here he is. He's sticking his neck out, in a sense, saying, what advice you like, you agree with. Even the elders, member of Israel, liked and agree with it. He said, it's not good, but he said it's not good. It's just not good right now. So he's trying to, bring him around in a sense. So he's saying, Ahithophel has spoken in this matter. Absalom spoke in this to him, saying, Ahithophel has spoken in this matter. Shall we do as he says? If not, speak up. So Hushai to Absalom, the advice that Ahithophel had given is not good at this time. For said Hushai, you know your father and his men, that they are mighty men. So these are the mighty men. Remember, we talked about the special forces, really, in a sense, of that of Israel. These are the men that are with him. They would be always around the home of David and taking care of protecting And that's who they are. Now, there were 30,000 of them, but there's not 30,000 in this bunch. It would be the small group of the mighty men, of those mighty men. So these are the best. It says, and they enraged in their minds like a bear robbed of her cubs in the field. And your father is a man of war and will not camp with the people. Anybody ever been around a mama bear, with a cub? We all know, we've all heard the stories, right, and everything. I know jogging one time years ago in Yosemite, and we were jogging with two other guys, and all of a sudden came in this big culvert there. It was on the side of it, getting ready to, I guess, put it somewhere. There was a cub that came out of it, and one of the guys running with us, he goes, "Oh, look at the baby cub!" And we go, "You better run!" We took off as fast as we could, because we know, that mama's somewhere close, and and she's just waiting for dinner. That's all she's waiting for, and that's what she's looking at. And we see that. So he's basically telling them, you're gonna make a big mistake, because this is like bothering a cub or doing something to the cub, and a mama bear is just not gonna put up with it. So then he goes on to say, and your father's a man of war and will not camp with his people. So in other words, you might find all the people, but David's going to be somewhere else hiding. You're going to have a hard time finding him. Surely by now, he is hidden in some pit or in some other place, and it will be when some of them are overthrown at first, that whoever hears it will say, there is a slaughter among the people who follow Absalom. Think about that for a moment. And even he who is bound him, whose heart is like the heart of a lion, will melt completely. For all of Israel knows that your father is a mighty man, and those who are with him are valiant men. Therefore I advise that all Israel be fully gathered to you. This is very important. From Dan to Beersheba, like the sand that is by the sea of multitude, and that you go to battle in person. Check that out. He's like, you need to be there. See what's being set up here, what's happening? And it goes on to verse 12. So we will come upon him in some place where he may be found, and we will fall on him as the dew falls on the ground, and of him and all the men who are with him there shall not be left so much as one. Moreover, if he has withdrawn into a city, then all Israel shall bring ropes to that city, and we will put it into the river, pull it into the river, until there is no one small stone found there. Now think about this for a moment, what we have. So when Hushai presents this counter-counsel, I guess we could say, he appeals to Absalom's pride and fear. This is what he's getting at here. He knows what he's doing. And he suggests a more larger-than-life approach, gathering all of Israel. Let's bring everybody. Gather all Israel. Let them see what you're doing. Let them show that there's a problem here, and we did this. Now, notice what he said. It says, from Dan to Beersheba, and him leading the army personally. Dan to Beersheba, this is used occasionally in the time of Israel, writings and so on. This basically means, I want you to see the map. Here's the map of Dan, way up here at the top, and Beersheba. So you have the top of Israel, you have the bottom of it, basically. There is some more that goes up, but this is the main focus area where you have people living and so on. And the phrase was a common expression in Israel that described the entire nation. So if you hear someone say, from Dan to Beersheba, that's what they're getting at, the whole area of Israel. And it signifies the completeness, totality, and Hushai was essentially saying, let all Israel unite behind you, king. That's basically what he's getting. No, he hasn't called him king, but he's saying that at that point that we see here. David, go ahead.
I was just going to say that you see that phrase often in the Bible, and it's from a geographical standpoint. It is like you just said, talking about from most northern end to most southern end,
Exactly.
everybody.
Right. Yeah. Hey, so it pulls it. So everybody knew this, what it meant. When you say it was a normal thing. And at times you'll hear, say Israel. Now, you don't know that's referring to all of Israel or part of Israel or whichever, but when they said this statement, everybody knew. Without a doubt, they saw it. So here, the appeal to Absalom's ego, it delayed the attack. I want y'all to notice that. It delayed the attack. Guess what it does? It gives David time to escape. David time to even get farther away from there because he sees they're looking for them now. 2 Samuel 17:14. Someone go ahead and read that for us, please.
So Absalom and all the individuals said, the advice of Hushai and Mordecai is better than the advice of Ahithophel, for the Lord had pursued to defeat the good advice of Ahithophel with the intent that the Lord might bring disaster on Absalom.
Thank you. So as we see here, notice here, it's like, okay, Ahithophel's information sounds good, but Hushai's, oh wow, this is great. And so we see, Ahithophel's advice was called, I want you to understand, his advice was called good, but God overruled it, that prayer being answered through Hushai. And David's prayer was answered without a doubt with a resounding, yes, I will do this, I will take care of it. And it reminds us that, God is not passive in the affairs of his people. We we say, well, yeah, that was in the Old Testament. God was talking to people and everything. Hasn't changed a thing. Not saying that God talks to us that way. He talks to us through His Word. But what we do understand without a doubt is God is still not passive in the affairs of His people. Even when circumstances look bleak, God is actively working behind the scenes. And that's what we have to always remember and think about. You know, you may be in a situation today where the odds have been basically stacked against you. You know, stacked against you in who knows how or many different ways. But never, ever underestimate the power of prayer aligned with God's will. Don't ever do that. You know, we can never get to the point where we go, you know, I don't even know why I need to pray to God anymore because things just don't seem to be working out for me. I've been doing this for a long time. I'm just done. You think it was bad then, imagine what will happen after that. I mean, there you're basically slapping God in the face saying, I don't want anything to do with you anymore. And that's what we see. Now that we all get into situations at times where maybe our faith kind of gets pulled down and away from God a little bit, that can happen. But we need to quickly, very quickly realize that's not what's going to help us. That's not what's going to take care of us. And that's where David finally sees this. So, with all this being the case, we get to this part. It is impossible to outsmart God. This is the outwitting that I talked about. It's just impossible. You can never, ever outsmart God as much as someone might think they can. They just can't do it. So, 2 Samuel 17, Hushai is going to warn David to escape. Great moment. He's going to warn him, get out of there, get out of town, you know, get moving. They're not that far. They're just, you know, they're not even a mile from, basically, we would see, or two from down to Jerusalem. So let's go ahead and look at what happens here. 17, I have 15 through 22. Someone's going to read 15 through 17, and then I'll show you a few things. So someone read this, please.
Then Hushai said to Zadok the Abiathar, the priest, thus and so Ahithophel advised Absalom and the elders of Israel, and so I have advised. Now therefore send quickly and tell David, saying, do not spend this night in the plains of the wilderness, but speedily cross over, lest the king and all the people who are with them be swallowed up. Now Jonathan and Ahimaaz stayed in El Rogel.
Thank you. So as we see this, there's very important things here. First of all, we understand what we see here at this moment that David is not, like Hushai said, he's not off alone, somewhere else by himself. He's with the people because he made it very clear. If they find David, they're going to find who? It says all the people that are with him. And they're going to be swallowed up. And so we see this. So remember as we think about this, the wilderness is just not, they haven't crossed the Jordan. They're just outside of basically, you would say, they're down, of course, below Jerusalem. But they're out over the brook, and they're a little ways outside of town, on the other side of the Tree of Olives. We see all this happening. Now, Jonathan and Ahimaaz, as they stayed in Enrogel, I'm going to show you how close this is, as you can see right here. First and foremost, here's Jerusalem. Everybody see Jerusalem right here? There's Enrogel. It's just right there. I mean, it's very, very close. Everybody probably would have thought, you know, if the king's running and his people, what are they going to do? How far are they going to go? I mean, they're going to stay, like, right next door? No, usually they get as far as they can. And this is where we see David, once again, is relying on God. David's making wise decisions, smart decisions. I want to show you another picture from the, I think it's the 1800s, where you can see us and understand. This is Enrogel right here. This is it. But notice right there, there's Jerusalem. There's Jerusalem right there. I mean, we talk about being a very difficult city to get to, you know, to attack and so on. You see why now. Certain areas where it looks like it's a very rough area and terrain. So this is where we see Jonathan and them basically holding up for that moment, as we see here. So let's jump in a little further now. Let's go and jump into the rest of 17. Doug, continue to read for us through verse 19, please.
For they dared not to be seen coming into the city, so a female servant would come and tell them, and they would go and tell King David. Nevertheless, a lad saw them and told Absalom. But both of them went away quickly and came to a man's house in Bahurim, who had a well in his court, and they went down into it. Then the woman took and spread a covering over the well's mouth and spread ground grain on it, and the thing was not known.
Thank you. So as we see here, once again, so notice, even though David isn't in Rogel, he's very close, because they would just go and tell him. But notice what happened when they were in the city. What happens to say when the two of them were in the city, checking, you know, not in the city, but real close there in Enrogel? What happened to them? Said they were what? They were seen. They were seen. So there was something about them that must have been known, people recognize who they are, what they were about, and they were seen, so they had to leave and go to Bahurim. And this is where it's at. I'm going to show you that it's a pretty good distance. So here you have En-Regolas. We just saw Jebus is what would have been Jerusalem later. We understand. But this is what the name was changed to. This is how do you say that again? Let me see. Bahurim. It's called Nob. This is where it's at now. So notice the Mount of Olives, just on the other side of Mount of Olives, and that's where they would be hiding at. And we see that. We do not know exactly where in the wilderness, like we said, where David was. I doubt it was here. We say, why is that? Because notice, these men just didn't go into town and stay there. They did what? What did they do? How did they hide? They went into a pit. They went into a pit that was covered up so they could hide there. Here's another way of looking at it. This is it with its actual name that we're looking at in the Bible now, Bahurim. So we notice it's not too far from the Jordan. It's still good ways. This is where we see the water could actually flood out to during the flood season. So we see this area, which now brings us verses 20 through 22. If someone go ahead and read that for us, please.
And when Absalom's servants came to the woman at the house, they said, "Where are Amishaz and Jonathan?" So the woman said to them, "They have gone over the water brook." And when they had searched and could not find them, they returned to Jerusalem. Now it came to pass, after they had departed, that they came up out of the well and went and told King David.
Thank you. So here, let me see. Let's go ahead and keep reading there. Finish 22 out. There you go.
And said to David, "Arise and cross over the water quickly, for thus has Ahithophel advised against you." So David and all the people who were with him arose and crossed over the Jordan. By morning light, not one of them was left who had not gone over the Jordan.
Thank you. So to go back to this real quick, just go back to this picture. So notice, somewhere in this area, we don't know exactly where, as we said, David and them are hiding, and they're telling him, Jonathan, because they had to leave Bahurim to go to, and everybody's saying, cross this way. So they want them to go this direction. It would actually be wherever they're at, probably somewhere in this vicinity. They would move in this direction, up in that direction. So they're getting out of there. They're going to cross the Jordan, as it said they did. Everybody that was with them is crossed. So everybody's out of the vicinity now. And basically, in a sense, we would say out of the reach of Absalom, because Absalom doesn't think they would have gone that far away. So Absalom believed, here it is, Absalom believed he was in control, right? He thought, I'm in control, I'm the king, I'm running everything, I got my dad on the run, I got all of his men on the run, I got all of his house on the run, I'm making things work. I have the people, the momentum, I have the counselors, yeah, everything I need is great. We forgot one thing. Who does he not have? God. Does not have God. He's going to find out, actually, he doesn't have all the people either, like he thought he did. And so, very important to see. So, Scripture makes it abundantly clear that no human strategy can ever outmaneuver divine sovereignty. That is the ways of God. And Paul declares it, actually, if you think about the book of Romans chapter 11, 33-34 reminds us today. Someone go and read this for us, please.
The depth of the riches, both of the wisdom and knowledge of God, how unsearchable are his judgments, his ways past finding out. For who has known the mind of the Lord, or who has become his counselor?
Thank you. Very important as we think about this. Remember what Absalom needed. A human being needed counsel. Counsel from smarter men. This question basically Paul's asking, is there anybody that's a counselor to God? There's no counselor to God. God is his own counselor. He's everything with it. Highest you're going to get at it, as we would see here. Very important to think about this for a moment. You know, people say, well, we can't really know God then. Yeah, we can, because he's given us his word, and that's what we need to have. But there's certain things we don't need to know. Do we know how God created everything? We know he did it, but do we know how he did it in 6 days? He says he did it with words, but do we actually know how it's done? No. Think about that for a moment. Created man and woman in that one day, and we know to have a child, it takes 9 months at least, and we see them, and some come early, of course, but you understand what I'm saying? We see this, that God, his certain ways are unsearchable. We're not going to find those answers, but we find the answers that we need to know in his word that will take the most important thing, that they explain to us how to get to heaven. And that's what we want to see here, and how to live here on this earth while we're waiting for that day. So I have to feel that may have had a counselor to kings, but he was not a counselor to God. John makes this point, statement in 1 John chapter 3, verse 20. If someone will read this for us, please.
For if our heart condemns us, God is greater than our heart and knows all
important to see that. You know, God knows all this, and we've got to catch that. God sees what we cannot, in other words. He knows every motive, every plan, every hidden agenda among people. And we're thankful for that. That should make us thankful. It really should, to see that God can keep certain things from happening in life. Jeremiah, another great area, Jeremiah chapter 32, verse 27. Someone read that for us, please.
Behold, I am the Lord, the God of all flesh. Is there anything too hard for me?
I love that statement. You know, where it tells that Jeremiah, you know, is there anything too hard for me? What does Jeremiah come back and say? I'm sure there is. Is that what he said? No, not at all. He knows exactly right. He's like, nope, nothing at all whatsoever. And we see this. So the answer is no. Not even overturning the best, you know, human advice. You know, it doesn't matter who the smartest person in the world is. They cannot outsmart God once again. Isaiah says these words in Isaiah chapter 48, verse 3. If someone read this, please.
I have declared the former things from the beginning. They went forth from my mouth, and I caused them to hear. Suddenly I did them, and they came to pass.
Thank you. What this verse shows us, I want to think about something here for just a second. When you and I, when things happen in our life, we react. You know, there's a reactionary reaction. There's actually, and we see that. You know, we react to things. Here's something interesting about God, and we see in this verse. God is never reacting. We need to get that. God is never, ever reacting. He is always fulfilling His purposes. Remember, even when things are bad happening, when people are bad leaders, whatever they're doing, God can still find a way through that to use them for His purpose. And so God never reacts. And we have to really catch that, because it really teaches us something on our actions and how we react to certain things in this life. You know, we have to ask, is that God's purpose or not? Well, God has a purpose for all things, and we see that. Which brings us a little bit further in Isaiah. Isaiah chapter 58, 5, verses 8 through 9. If someone read this, please.
For my thoughts are not your thoughts, nor are your ways my ways, says the Lord. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts.
Thank you. So we got to go back to Hatfield just a second. Think about Hatfield. What he says, you know, he's basically, we said, was very quick, very swift, you know, very sharp, straight answered. And a lot of what he was doing to fulfill himself, to bring him to where he needs to be. And we see there was just a difference with Hushai. Hushai was one that spoke strategically. And Absalom chose, here it is, Absalom chose emotionally, which really was not a smart thing to do, but that's what he did. He chose emotionally because we see that it made the fear and the pride that came with the statement that Hushai said. So God rules sovereignty, always rules over. That's what we find, which brings us to this moment here, the tragic end of worldly wisdom. When Ahithophel saw that his counsel was rejected, you know, basically, yours is good. That's what he was all about, getting his way and everything we see. When it was rejected, he knew what that meant. He knew that he basically, probably his word was not going to be looked at any longer, because his thought is he knew what Hushai was saying, thinking, that is a great plan. I mean, a great plan, really, when it comes down to it. So what happens is the delay would give David once again the advantage, the rebellion would fail, and in a sense, Ahithophel kind of understood this, which brings us to this next moment, 2 Samuel 17, 23. A sad moment, but this is what we see, what happens with worldly pride and no humility in your life towards God. Someone read this, please.
And when Ahithophel saw that his advice was not followed, he saddled a donkey and arose and went home to his house, to his city. Then he put his household in order, hanged himself, and died. He was buried in his father's tomb.
Imagine that. Imagine that right there. What a tragic end, right? I mean, what a very tragic end. A man, he was very smart. You know, he's a very intellectual man, without a doubt. But, you know, man, great intellect, undone not by lack of wisdom, but by lack of submission to God. That's what all this was about. And he kind of understood that. And so, worldly wisdom may elevate us for a moment, but without God, it will ultimately collapse. And that's what we see here, which now brings us, I'm doing good, we got 5 minutes, which brings us to here, 2 Samuel 17, 24 through 29. If someone read through 26, and then we'll come back and we'll continue from there.
Then David went to Menahem, and Absalom crossed over the Jordan, and all the men of Israel with him. And Absalom made Amasa captain of the army instead of Joab. This Amasa was the son of a man whose name was Jephthah, an Israelite, who had gone to Abigail, the daughter of Nahash, sister of Zeruiah, Joab's mother. So Israel and Absalom encamped in the land of Gilead.
Thank you. Those mentions right here about this man, whose name was Jephthah, this will come a little bit later, be important as we see this, but for this moment right here, I just want to look at some things, how far David went. So now we know how far David goes. Look what he did here. He was over in this area in the Jordan River Valley, the wilderness, and now he's crossed over. He's gone all this direction. This is quite a ways. And that's a very important place. Remember what happened there? Anybody remember here? Jacob? Anybody remember having Jacob here? This is where Jacob the ladder, that we see that, understanding there's a lot going on here. An altar was put here, and in other words, David felt comfortable here. Is really what happened here in this moment, where he felt comfortable at. And then you have the forest of Ephraim, where he'll actually end up finally being at, and you're going to see the green, other things are going to take place there. Gilead, let me just say that, as you notice, it said it was in Gilead. This same area, as we find here, it's all of Gilead, that area that we see. Which brings us now to 27 through 29. If someone go and read that for us, please.
Now it happened when David had come to Mahanaim that Shobi, the son of Nahash, from Rabbi of the people of Ammon, Makar, the son of Amiel from Lo-Debar, and Barzillai, the Gileadite from Rogelim, bought beds and basins, earthen vessels, and wheat, barley, and flour, parched grain and beans, lentils and parched seeds, honey and curds, sheep and cheese of the herd for David, and the people who were with him to eat. For they said, the people are hungry and weary and thirsty in the wilderness.
Thank you. So now remember, we look back at this area. I just want you to remember, this is not a, oops, go back. This is not an area that's really a comfortable place to live. I guess the best way to put it. It's very, it's very rugged and rough terrain. So that's where it ends, that chapter. I got 3 minutes as we see that, but I want to make this point here, is that choosing the right counsel, very important for us today. The message of this chapter is very, very clear, and that is first and foremost, number one, not all good advice is God's will. We got to get that. It may be called good, it may seem good, and it may even look good, but it doesn't mean it's the will of God. Number two, God answers the prayers of his people. We have to see that and get that and understand it always. Number three, no one can outthink or outplan or outmaneuver God in any way whatsoever. So the question becomes this for you and I today. Whose counsel are we following? Are we following worldly counsel or are we following spiritual counsel? And we need to really think about that question. Are we chasing worldly gain at the expense of our soul? We have to catch that, think of that. Or are we pursuing the will of God, which I pray we all are, when it requires humility and patience? Remember this, the world says this, act now, win fast. That's really, we really see that in the 21st century. Act now and win fast. Here is what God often says. He says these words, wait and trust me. That's where it happens. We get in a hurry sometimes, we want things to happen right now, right then, and God says, slow down. Wait. And it's important to slow down. We move at such a fast pace at times. And I know even me, I speak really fast. I understand that and get that, but it doesn't mean I live my life fast, And it's so important to slow down. It says slow down and smell the roses, and we see that and the importance with it. So at the field rush, who shall delay, and God deliver. And we have to ask ourselves, may we always be the people who seek not just what works, but what is right. Not what just advances us, but what honors God in everything we think of. And may we rest in the assurance that when we pray according to the will of God, notice how he said that. We pray according to God's will, heaven hears and heaven responds. And that's how we need to think about it. And that's a great lesson throughout this whole chapter here that we can learn and use to live in our lives. Any comments or questions before we close this morning? Anybody else? Nope. Appreciate the class. Thank you.